Gary with IQ Munitions here. So, regarding our 10-round magazine that's designed to fit and function in the 7744, the 9644, and the 9944. And as we continue to sell magazines to customers around the world, we get more feedback. And it's all beneficial to us and to the customers in the long run. So the other day we had a customer that was having a serious fitment issue with our magazine, and he bought 2 magazines in his Ruger 7744, which I have here. And he sent us the gun because he liked the magazine, they function properly, but the installation and removal of the magazine in the gun as he tried to install it and remove it was extremely difficult. So he graciously agreed to send us the gun so we could look at it, go through it, and work out the problems that he was having. I mean, it's in our best interest as well as everybody else's that we understand fully how these guns differ from year to year and model to model. So I just took these 2 guns down. I took the stocks off them, and this is our rifle here. We have 2 of these, 2 7744s of our own, and this is the customer's gun. So I took my calipers and I measured the magazine well opening from the face of the trigger guard here to this little pillar that stands up that has a hole in it that accepts this boss in the front of our magazine. So I went ahead and measured that on the customer's gun and our gun, and the customer's gun was 13 thousandths of an inch smaller across this dimension than our lower receiver on our 7744, which I found interesting. Our gun was manufactured in 1999, and the customer's gun, according to the Ruger website, was manufactured somewhere in 2013. So he also sent us the 2 magazines that he purchased from us. And when I looked at them, I immediately noticed that there were, some When I looked at the customer's magazines that he had sent back with his rifle, I noticed that there were on both magazines, 2 pronounced gouge marks in the nose of the magazine. So let's see what's causing that. So there's a letter that we post on our website regarding the fit and function of our 10-round magazine, and it talks about dimensional variations that we have discovered over the years in these factory guns from gun to gun and year to year. Nonetheless, we recommend that customers who have a problem with the fitment of their magazine, our magazine, in their gun, of course everybody installs the magazine initially with the stock on the gun. And we have found that the magwell opening in the stocks, whether they're wood or synthetic, varies wildly, 20 to every bit of 30 thousandths of an inch, and these are routed out with some CNC router. So that variability isn't unusual, but nonetheless, what we recommend is if the magazine is tight in the customer's gun with the stock installed, to go ahead and remove the stock and see if the magazine fits any better with the stock removed and just in the metal portion of the lower, of the receiver, the upper receiver. So when I saw these gouge marks in the nose of the magazine, I went ahead and took the stock off, and I'll show you this right here. This point right here on this little tower that catches the nose pin of the magazine has a hole that goes through. that allows this nose pin to lock into the receiver. I noticed these points here, after I measured this opening and discovered that it was 13 thousandths smaller than our receiver, I started to look closely at this tower that sticks up here. And right here on both sides, there were pronounced, and I won't call them burrs, they were more than that. It was part of the casting that had never been machined back. I mean, these are investment cast receivers, and you can see just by looking at the roughness here that this is a cast receiver, and they don't finish machine that portion of the receiver that typically wouldn't have anything rubbing on it. But nonetheless, so this portion right here had a pronounced edge, and I guess I'll call it a burr to a great extent, which was biting into the face of the magazine and causing extreme difficulty in removing the magazine from the gun. And the only reason, and I have not retrofitted our 7744, I haven't had to, because our magwell opening in the receiver is bigger, but having taken the stock off our gun as well, to do this demonstration, our gun does have this relatively pointed burr-like edge on either side of this tower that supports the front of the magazine. And I am going to correct that problem, but haven't done it yet and haven't had to just because our magwell opening was larger than the customer's gun. Nonetheless, so I addressed that initially. And the way I do a lot of this work, pistol smithing and otherwise, is I use these abrasive impregnated rubber bobs. You can buy them online. They're surprisingly cheap. I want to say this whole kit was $20. And there are various coarsenesses of grit here, this being the coarsest, medium, and fine, and a lot of different shapes there. And they're great at polishing surfaces and removing burrs. You can't remove a lot of metal with those, and they're not designed to do that. But nonetheless, they'll take rough edges and burrs off and smooth things up nicely. So I took the coarsest bob here, and I went ahead and I worked this surface fairly extensively and took that rough edge, that pronounced burr, if I can use that term, off on both sides, radius this a little bit more. I reach down in this hole that protrudes through this portion of the receiver, and there was a burr inside of there, and took one of the smaller diameter bobs on a Dremel tool, it's got an 1/8 inch shank on it, and just cleaned that up in there and deburred this area. And then I went down in here as well, because this was relatively rough, just like this portion of the casting, and went ahead and cleaned all of that up with one of the bobs, the abrasive bobs. So that made a huge difference in how the magazine went in and out of the gun. It was 98%. Okay, I still wasn't satisfied with the results entirely, so I examined the back of the magazine at this point, because I wanted to see if there was some problem, something interfering with the magazine inserting and removing at the back. And I noticed, some relatively heavy scarring on the back here of the feed lips of the magazine. So I thought, okay, let's look at the back of the magwell opening here, which is part of the trigger group. And immediately I noticed that when depressing the magazine release, it was rough. And there were times when the magazine was inserted and I tried to retract the plunger to release the magazine, and would get stuck part way. So, okay, so what's going on there? So I went ahead and pushed this pin out, and on the 7744, the mag release comes out really easily, and So I just push the pin through, you just depress this slightly to relieve the spring tension, and this thing pulls right out of there. This is one of our extended magazine releases, but you could do the same thing with a factory magazine release. So then this thing comes right out. There's the spring that causes it to extend and retract. Well, then I proceeded to try to understand why this thing was hanging up when you depress the magazine release and actually preventing the magazine from releasing freely or just gouging on the back of the magazine feed lips here when you were trying to insert it and remove it. So I took one of my rubber bobs, I looked down this bore, and there were very pronounced machining marks in here. Once again, it was an area that had been bored out with an end mill or a drill or whatever, and there were very pronounced machining marks in there. So I went ahead and took one of the rubber bobs again and polished that out thoroughly. And once again, I didn't remove any significant amount of metal, maybe a half thou, but I just cleaned that area up real well. And then also, while I was working the bob in there, I brought it up and I radiused these just slightly, these two ears here, because they came out squared off and once again were fairly sharp on the outward edges. And I went ahead and just cleaned those up and just put a slight radius on those as well. So then I addressed the plunger body itself. And I think if we can zoom in at all, we can see right here the coarse machine marks on this plunger body. And I didn't bother to remove those, I could. But anyways, they were fairly coarse. So between the machine marks in here, the annular rings in here, and these marks here, the plunger wasn't going in and out freely and interfering with the insertion and the removal of the magazine. But what I did do is I took this to a deburring wheel. You could have done it with some sandpaper. And the back edge of this thing was very squared off and a relatively sharp edge. There wasn't really a burr there, but it was a hard 90. And that was also dragging, that sharp edge there was dragging on those rings, the machining marks left inside this plunger bore. So I went ahead and put a slight radius on this as well. And reinstalled the whole thing, and the magazine just flies in and out of there now. Just goes down in there like that. And temporarily put the pin back in. All right, so now we've got the magazine release reinstalled here. It's just smooth as it should be, whereas opposed to the roughness that we experienced, and it actually prevented the magazine release from fully retracting and of course giving the magazine extreme difficulty in getting it out of there. So now the thing pops in and out as it should. So you put your nose pin in first and just retract it, rock it back, and it's locked in place. And it comes out just like that. In and out. That easy. And that's the way it should be. So as an aside, it's interesting, we have a business associate of ours who converts 7744s into integrally suppressed bolt guns. And he has dozens of the factory Ruger magazines in his inventory, because when he buys a gun, it comes with one or two magazines, but nonetheless, I spoke with him the other day, and he indicated to me, and he actually sent me dimensions of roughly 24 of the Ruger factory magazines, and they varied as much as 28 thousandths of an inch in overall length. So even the factory magazines themselves vary substantially. Now 28 thousandths doesn't sound like a lot, but when we manufacture our magazine, these magazines are held to within plus or minus a half a thousandth of an inch. Our machines are that capable of maintaining consistent accuracy. But that being said, because of the weight of our magazine, especially when it's loaded and it hangs down out of the bottom of the gun, if our magazines were as sloppy as the factory mags are, they would fall out of the gun during firing, due to recoil and the movement, especially in the 9944 semi-automatic. So we intentionally made our magazines just slightly bigger than the factory magazines, but once again, we're plus or minus a half thou or plus or minus a thou max from one end to the other. But due to the fact that the magwell openings on these Rugers vary to a degree, it's just important to know this. If you go to our website and you're considering buying a magazine, you need to read our notice regarding fit and function, and be willing and or able to make these slight modifications to either your stock, the magwell opening in your stock, or do some polishing here inside the receiver itself so that the mag fits appropriately, installs and removes easily. So once again, it's been great for us to be able to get a hold of a customer's gun and go through it. We learn more every time we look at somebody else's gun as to what fitment issues might be. Now, I'll tell you, I would say in the last month we've sold 150 of our magazine. And we've had 2 customers, this being the one of them, that had, serious fitment issues. So, it's less than 2%, let's put it that way. It's 1.5% of people that have had some difficulty, or at least given us feedback that they've had difficulty. And if you bought a magazine and you're having some fitment issues, we'd certainly like to hear from you. We get a lot of positive feedback, but actually, in the long run, the negative feedback helps us more to work through some of the issues that our customers are running into regarding the fitment and the function of our 10-round magazine. Anyways, thank you for watching.